The views and opinions expressed on any program are those of the producers and/or the persons appearing on the program and do not necessarily reflect the views and opinions of FRC Media, Bristol Community College, or the City of Fall River.
Hello, this is the Richard Urban Show, and I'm Sally White, sitting in for Attorney Urban, who is in Washington, D.C. today and unable to be with us. Richard is particularly sorry not to be able to host today's program because he has arranged a very special guest, former Connecticut Congressman and gubernatorial nominee Bob Steele, who is a leading expert on the spread of casino gambling. Bob Steele is a Connecticut business executive and the author of The Curse, Big-Time Gambling Seduction of a Small New England Town, published by Levelers Press. The book, which recently went into its second printing, is a fact-based novel set against the explosion of casino gambling in Connecticut during the 1990s, when two Indian tribes built the world's two biggest casinos in southeastern Connecticut. WBZ's Radio's Dan Ray calls the novel powerful, and Connecticut author Martin Shapiro describes it as compelling and timely, a riveting story of history, money, and politics that will make you wonder where America is headed. Bob is currently on an author's tour, speaking at some 300 libraries, civic organizations, and colleges about his book and the impact of casino gambling on the nation. He is in the area to speak at the Tiverton Public Library, and we are delighted to have him. Welcome, Bob.
Thank you very much. I'm delighted to be here.
Let's move right into the questions. Bob, you've written a novel about casinos in Connecticut that is getting a great deal of attention across New England and the entire Northeast. Can you please tell us a bit about the book?
Yes, the book is a novel. It's set against the explosion of casino gambling in Connecticut, as you said, during the 1990s, when two Indian tribes, the Mashantucket Pequots and the Mohegans, built the world's two biggest casinos in the southeastern part of our state, in New London County. The story starts back in the 1600s, when the Connecticut colonists, living up and down the Connecticut River from Windsor down to Old Saybrook, got together with their Mohegan allies and defeated and almost destroyed the Pequots, who were the largest and most warlike of the Connecticut tribes. The story then jumps some 350 years as these two tribes re-emerge almost miraculously, thanks to Congress and the courts, to build these two enormous enterprises. And in the story, a fictional Connecticut family becomes embroiled in a battle to stop a third casino that threatens the family's town and ancestral home. So the story in the end really is a Faustian tale about a small, quintessential New England town faced with a dilemma, whether or not to accept an enormously lucrative and seductive proposal, or on the other hand, try to protect and preserve the character and the values of the community. So it's a story that is probably particularly appropriate for Tiverton, Rhode Island right now. Mm-hmm.
But there must have been something that really compelled you to write this. Is there something beyond that you felt needed to be said, to be shared with people?
I represented Eastern Connecticut in Congress during the 1970s, almost all the towns east of the Connecticut River. And I left Congress in order to be a candidate for governor of Connecticut. I was not successful. I was a nominee, but I didn't win the election. And at that point, I left Congress and I left politics. And my family, my wife and our 4 children, moved from Vernon, Connecticut, near Hartford, down to Ledyard, Connecticut, long before anybody dreamed of casinos coming to Connecticut. And those two experiences, knowing the political backdrop of Connecticut as well as I did, and then living in the midst of the subsequent casino explosion, gave me a front row seat for watching all the political maneuverings that led to the casinos and then seeing their impact firsthand. And that impact had has had an enormous impact on Connecticut and on the local region. And it was that experience that really led me to write the book.
Now, a lot of people know about Atlantic City's casinos, and we know they're struggling. But what's happening in Connecticut? Are they struggling or thriving?
They're struggling. More and more states, casinos are struggling. Connecticut's casinos initially were an enormous success. They began to attract well over half their customers from out of state, mainly from Massachusetts and New York and Rhode Island, but from all over the Northeast. And they initially created some 23,000 casino jobs, and they began to send hundreds of millions of dollars a year to the state treasury in Hartford. But that was then, and this is now. The casinos for the last 7 years have been steadily losing business as there is more and more building of and saturation of new casinos in the Northeast. When Foxwoods opened back in 1992, there were only 10 other casinos in the entire 12 states of the Northeast. Today there are 57 casinos in those 12 states, soon to be over 70 casinos. And because of that enormous competition, Connecticut's casinos are faltering. The casino revenue is down some 38%. They've been eliminating jobs. They've eliminated over 8,000 casino jobs now. They have been turning more and more to part-time jobs in order to reduce overall wage costs and eliminate medical benefits. And Foxwoods and Mohegan Sun both are in debt. Foxwoods is so deeply in debt that it has stopped all distributions, all payments to its tribal owners. So yeah, Connecticut's casinos, as in New Jersey, as in Atlantic City, as in an increasing number of states, are facing a great number of problems right now.
So the casinos themselves are struggling, but for the state, which derives some income, is it a plus or a minus for the state?
Well, the state at its peak was taking in at its peak $430 million a year in shared slot revenue. The two casinos, under agreement with the state, have to give 25% of their slot revenue to the state of Connecticut. But that revenue now has fallen from a peak of $430 million to well under $270 million today. So it's down almost 40%.
Well, then that leads into what lessons can we learn from Connecticut casinos' experience for Rhode Island and Massachusetts?
Well, it's interesting. Here's Rhode Island now looking at another casino. You know, I don't even know if most people in Rhode Island who are residents here realize it. But Rhode Island the state of Rhode Island, already receives about 11% of its total general revenue budget from gambling. As a matter of fact, Rhode Island gets more money, the state of Rhode Island, the government of Rhode Island, more money per capita from gambling than any other state, including even Nevada, when you take the lottery and you put together the casinos, etc. And now Rhode Island wants to make it even worse. Rhode Island now wants to depend even more on gambling. You can see what happened in Connecticut. You can see what is happening in New Jersey. You can see what's happening in Delaware. You can see what's happening in state after state. So by increasing its dependence on gambling revenue, Rhode Island is setting itself up for a major budget crisis. And as Massachusetts begins to open its new casinos, it's already opened one in Plainville, obviously, but when it opens its casinos, particularly in Boston, and whether it's in Taunton or whether it's in Brockton, at that point, Rhode Island is going to face, in all probability, a very serious budget crisis.
So casinos are sensitive to the economic cycles in the country, and then...
No question, yeah. No question, but the big thing is not so much the economic cycles as this enormous oversaturation of casinos. I mean, going from 10 to 57 to 70, what is happening is, it doesn't mean there are less gamblers. Every time one of these new casinos opens, there are more gamblers because everything is convenience today. So if a convenience is just 5 miles away or 10 miles away, more and more people from that local area will gamble. And we know, incidentally, that gambling addiction doubles within 10 miles of a casino. The problem is it's harder and harder for the individual casinos to make money because of all this competition. And at that point, they start sending less and less money to the state, less and less money to their local communities, and start asking for more and more help. For example, in Delaware now, the state of Delaware has now spent millions of dollars trying to bail out its 3 casinos. In New Jersey, the state has spent hundreds of millions of dollars trying to prop up its casinos, only to see 4 of them close in the last 20 months. So this is not an expanding business as far as individual casinos is concerned. This is a business that is in increasing trouble, and it's a business that involves an enormous amount of risk.
Earlier you used the word convenience.
Yeah.
Now, how does that tie into the internet gambling? And of course, everyone has their devices. So what about internet gambling?
Well, that's a good question. What is happening now, let's take Connecticut, for example, and this is happening in state after state. As the casino revenue begins to decline, what the state government does is try to increase gambling, either to increase gambling revenue or to replace the gambling revenue it's losing to out-of-state competition. And in Connecticut, for example, we've got these 2 huge casinos, but that's not enough. Connecticut has now increased the free play allowance for the casinos so they can try to attract more customers. Connecticut has now approved Keno for restaurants, bars, taverns, the casino game Keno. And Connecticut's legislature has proposed building anywhere between 1 and 3 new convenience casinos in Connecticut in order to guard against Connecticut people going to Massachusetts or New York to gamble. As far as internet gambling, that's part of the picture because thanks to a ruling in 2011 by the U.S. Justice Department, the federal government now has said basically that internet gambling on an in-state basis they've indicated that it's legal. So you've now had Nevada, New Jersey, and Delaware all legalize online gambling for their casinos. Connecticut's Mohegan Casino has already begun operations for online gambling in New Jersey, in-state. New York just put in a bill to begin online gambling. You can be sure that's what will happen here in Rhode Island. You can be sure that's what will happen in Massachusetts as the gambling begins to fade and the states, which become so hooked on the gambling money, want to replace it. So they'll look to online gambling to replace
And there are age limits on this.
Well, on online gambling, there would be an age limit. It'd be whatever the age limit is in the state. And for example, in Connecticut, it's 21. But any kid who got a hold of a parent's credit card, of course, they wouldn't know the difference. Now, the way it's set up right now, it would be only in-state. In other words, to gamble online in New Jersey with a New Jersey casino, you would have to physically be in the state of New Jersey. But there has been repeated efforts in Congress to legalize it for the country as a whole, and that is a major battle going on in Congress right now. And you may have seen the Republican presidential debate recently about it didn't go into online gambling, but it went into Donald Trump's effort to make campaign contributions in Florida in order to get expanded casino gambling there. And as I say, the casino gambling increasingly now is leading for pressure for online gambling.
Well, a lot of people witnessed that, and there was quite an exchange between the 2 candidates, Trump and Bush. And my understanding is that there had been some use of campaign contributions to gain political support. Is that something to be concerned about? Is that widespread? Mr. Trump denied it, and Mr. Bush said that, no, you really did that. But is the casino industry using their wealth to try to buy political influence?
Casino industry is one of the biggest political contributors in the United States.
Oh.
What happened with what Trump said, Trump contributed to Bush. He hoped that Bush would help open up, expand gambling in Florida. Bush called him on it and said, look, you contributed to me, but I didn't do it because I'm against expanded gambling. And Trump at that point said, well, that's not true. But it's very clear it was true. And one press source after another has shown that to be the case. But to your point, does the casino gambling industry contribute? The casino gambling industry tries to overwhelm opponents in every community, just as they are doing here in Tiverton. For example, up in Brockton, Massachusetts, the casino developer trying to get into Brockton, Massachusetts, outspent its opponents. Its opponents were churches, civic groups, and other individuals. Outspent its opponents 450 to 1.
Oh my.
Because the casino industry has all the money in the world. It's just another marketing expense for them. Whereas people, individuals and churches, community groups in a community have very, very little money and are not organized. In Massachusetts, in last November, remember last November there was a vote on a referendum whether or not to repeal the casino law, which allowed casinos in Massachusetts. There, the casino industry ran over 4,000 television ads the last month of the campaign. The opponents ran none because they had no money. And this is what the casino industry tries to do. It tries to overwhelm the local community or the state with a very, very expensive publicity campaign.
Could you give a summary into what you'll present tonight when you speak to when you do speak to the people in the library? What are the main points that you'll be presenting to the Tiverton area people?
Well, I'm going to talk about the impact of casinos on social and public health problems. The fact that, according to the best research we have, bringing a casino into a community, when you bring a new casino into a new community, the cost-to-benefit ratio to that area is usually over 3 to 1. That's according to the leading independent, nonpartisan expert, one of the leading economist who was a leading economist for the Council of Economic Advisors, who advises the president on the economy. His name is Earl Grinnells. He's now a professor an economist at Baylor University. So whether it's the economy, whether it's public health, whether it's social issues such as debt, bankruptcies, broken families, crime, this is normally a bad deal for a community.
Then you've raised all these negatives. Now, you've been an elected official, you've been a businessman. Then why in the world would so many politicians and business people be so quick to support casino gambling?
The money. They want the quick money. They know that they'll get some initial money for the community. What they don't do is look into what is happening across the country. They don't look in at all the research. For example, just in the last 10 years, there are now 11 studies that show that anywhere from 35 to 60% of casino revenue comes from people with gambling addiction. That is, they're either pathological gamblers or they have some level of gambling addiction. So actually what is happening here, the casino is coming in and telling you all these great things it's going to do. What it doesn't tell you is that, look, its basic business model is dependent on preying upon addicted gamblers. If it didn't have the addicted gamblers, it wouldn't nearly make enough money to stay in business. So really what it should do is come into the town and say, look, we want you to understand our basic business when we come into town is to prey on addicted gamblers. But they won't say that. Instead, they'll come in and say, look, we're going to give you so much revenue, we're going to create jobs, we're going to create economic development. And according to the basic research, while the casino is likely to be successful in the early years, long term, it is a negative for the community.
Now, I had heard that there's a professor, if I got this right, at MIT that has written a book, because I think when people go into casinos, they think they're in control. But what has this MIT professor found in her work or her research?
Well, if anybody has any doubts about the addictiveness of the latest slot machines, we should get a hold of a book entitled Addiction by Design by a brilliant young MIT professor by the name of Natasha Scholl. The book details in dramatic detail how today's slot machines are the product of enormous corporate research and some of the best brains in America in terms of designing machines meant to keep people playing as long as possible. They call it time on device, keeping people time on device, because the longer they play, the more they lose. And the machines have been really redesigned substantially in order to keep people playing by having more frequent but lower payouts, and also more frequent near misses. So that individuals, oh, I almost won, I gotta bet again. And that's the idea, to keep you gambling as long as possible, to extract as much money as possible from you.
And go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, you mentioned a professor. There's another professor too, now that you've mentioned it, doesn't deal with online gambling so much, but this is a professor at Western Connecticut State University, which just released a study on crime, crime in the 11 towns surrounding the 2 casinos in Connecticut. There's always been a big argument whether crime has really gone up or not gone up, etc., in Connecticut since the casinos came, because the big fact has been that there's been a major decline in crime across the United States and in Connecticut over the last 20, 25 years. But this professor's study shows that despite this enormous drop in crime in Connecticut as a whole, that violent crime went up in the 11 towns surrounding Foxwoods and Mohegan Sun, aggravated assault, murder, rape, etc. And that while theft crimes actually declined slightly, the amount of money lost in those theft crimes increased by some 40%. And he also did a number of interviews with police and judicial officials afterwards, which showed increases in crime such as prostitution and illicit drug use.
This has got to have an impact on home values or real estate, or how about businesses, private businesses that surround casinos?
Well, you know, the casinos basically cannibalize other retail businesses and other entertainment businesses. I mean, I could tell you a story, I don't think we have time, but a story about a fellow who was a good friend of mine who lost his restaurant to one of the casinos. As Steve Wynn said, Steve Wynn was trying to get a casino into Bridgeport, Connecticut, and he met with a group of small businessmen who asked him how much they could count on the casino bringing additional revenue to the community and helping the local economy. And Wynn looked at them and he said, look, he said, don't believe for 1 second that just because people come to my casino, they're going to walk into your stores or your restaurants. He said, that's not going to happen. In other words, the casino is an all-consuming business. And rather than boost the local economy, it's much more likely to cannibalize existing businesses.
And if we have time, what about the impact on local government or schools? Is there anything impact? I mean, do they hire people from the local towns, or who do they hire?
Well, I'll give you an example of Norwich. And with Connecticut's casinos, they had to bring in thousands of workers from outside because these are mostly low-paying service jobs. Not all of them.
I thought they were higher-paying jobs.
Most of them are low-paying service jobs, and the more automation you have, the more that is true. In any event, in the case of Mohegan Sun and Foxwoods, they brought in thousands of workers from outside the area. There were so many non-English speaking immigrants who came in fact, that the Norwich public school system had to create what is called an ESOL program, English for Speakers of Other Languages. It cost them about $2.5 million a year to educate kids who had some 32 different primary languages.
Now, if in the local community the economy begins to fall, what is the impact there?
Well, let's take Atlantic City, for example. There, as I said, they've lost well over 8,000 jobs. 4 of the 12 casinos that were there 20 months ago have now closed. Another one, it is reported, is getting ready to close. And what has happened there is, of course, when all those people start losing their jobs, instead of the town adding jobs, it puts enormous social pressure on the social services that the town is providing. Moreover, instead of now the town having more money, the town now has less money. For example, in Atlantic City, last August, the Atlantic City Council was talking about having to implement a 28% property tax increase because of the decline in jobs and revenue. So when the casinos are first coming in, and the jobs are being added and the revenue is going up, people say, oh, look, isn't this great? When it starts down, it is usually a very serious problem, if not a crisis for the community.
And then the local residents, the taxpayers, in a sense, end up rather subsidizing the consequences.
That's exactly what is happening now. It's happening now. It's beginning to happen in Connecticut. It's happening in a big way in New Jersey. It's happening in a big way in Delaware. It's happening in a number of states.
Quite a betrayal. Bob, would you tell us what type of organizations and where have you been to present this information and to speak about your book?
Well, I've been very fortunate. I've been invited to libraries, civic groups, churches, colleges, universities across New England and New York. I've talked to some probably 350 groups. And I think it's an educational campaign because most people just have no idea what they're asking for when they ask for a casino to come into their community.
And do you have a website that people can do some research?
I'm glad you asked. I do have a website. It's rhsteele, STEELE.com. That's pretty simple, rhsteele.com. This is the book, The Curse, Big Time Gambling Seduction of a Small New England Town.
Well, very informative, Mr. Steele. We certainly appreciate it. And I know Richard Urban was very disappointed not to be here and meet you and conduct this interview, but we look forward to your presentation at the library.
Well, Richard's a great guy, and I'm delighted to be here.